So, the title of my message today is called God Calls Us to the Peculiar. And that basically means that when we really surrender our will to God, and I'd said in many other videos, there's a difference, I believe, between surrendering our lives and surrendering our wills. There's a lot of people that ask Jesus in their hearts, but then they continue doing what they want to do rather than knowing what God wants them to do. And so when God calls us, when we surrender our will to Him, living for Him, according to Romans 12, verses 1 to 2, then He'll have us go on a certain path for His will. It'll lead us into doing what He wants us to do. I mean, it could be a missionary to another country, or who knows what it will be, but it's for His purposes. So when our lives are given over to God, He takes us into His direction for His purposes. And of course, from what I had seen in my own walk, and when we give our lives to God, we talk to people about Jesus, and sometimes we get ridiculed for doing that. People will make fun of us and stuff. So that's part of it. But when we really live our lives for God, it conflicts with the way the world does things. So, like I said, when our lives are given over to God, He takes us into His direction for His purposes. And this direction will conflict with the way the world does things. I mean, different examples. We have John the Baptist. God called him as somebody that would prepare the way for the Lord. And how did he dress? In camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist. And I'm sure that was like really odd to a lot of people. And I'm sure he got ridiculed for that. Who knows what he had endured doing what he did for God and then getting arrested by Herod and then finally being put to death. And then we have Abraham. You know, he heard God's voice and God called him away from his family to a place that God would show him. And I'm sure this conflicted with, you know, the people of his time. It would conflict today. I mean, what are you talking about? You're leaving your family, you're leaving security, you're leaving comfort to go into the desert. But that's what God wanted. And I believe God takes us away from, what we know and from people that won't accept our message. And so he brings us to where he wants us to be. And then we have Abraham's promise of a son in his old age. That was ridiculous. Him being old in age and Sarah being old in age, how are they going to have a child? But, that conflicted with the logical minds of this world. And so each of them had been called in, separate directions. Look at Elijah. You know, uh, God sent him to Ahab, saying that there's not going to be any rain except by his word. And then there was a famine. And then, God sending him to a widow. I mean, if that happened today, he would be, really ridiculed. He'll be criticized for not doing what this world said that he had to do. He was called, to turn Israel back to God and away from Baal. And then Elisha's instructions to somebody, either Elisha or Elijah, one of them. But an axe head fell into the water. There was no way to get it. So what was God's instructions to him? Get a stick and throw it on the water. And then what happened? The axe head floated, which is totally impossible, I believe, according to the way this world functions. It's impossible because it goes against the logical mind. And then we have Naaman, the Syrian, who had leprosy. Elisha told him to go bathe in the water 7 times. That is ridiculous, according to what this world would think. But what happened? He was clean. So each didn't have a quote unquote normal life. Each served God with specific purposes. And when we do that, there is a satisfaction on the part of the person that is listening to God and wanting to be obedient, because then you know you're following God's will. Now, we know of the norm of this world and how it functions. We know of the standards that people live by. We know that we're born into this world. We're taught, success. We have to follow success. Uh, Having a good education and get a good paying job and investments and all this stuff I covered in my other videos. But this is the standard by which everyone in this world lives. And I guess what really sparked me to make this video is the fact that when I got on these dating sites, I put very explicitly what I was doing for God. And I didn't get any bites because my lifestyle is in direct conflict with what a lot of these women want. They want a guy that's successful. Well, what I'm doing currently for God, it isn't bringing success, you know, but I know what I have been called to, and there's satisfaction in knowing that I'm doing what God wants me to do. But that doesn't stop there. I know that God will bless me when the time comes for doing his will. And then there's also the satisfaction at that time of teaching people to trust God and to rely on him and to break the shackles of this world that is still on them. So I had already said that we know of the norm of this world and how it functions, and success, making money. And so everyone has to fall in line on the set standard by the financially elite, those who teach the laws of success. Now, when God calls, the person is set to live in a way that conflicts with the standards of this world and how it functions. Abraham was, like I already said, was to leave his father's household and go to the place that God would show him. He'd walk in faith for Isaac. And then, using me as an example, God, when I surrendered my will to God, he called me to walk in faith for my needs to be met. But it wasn't only there. He was going to expose the way this world functions to me and showing me more or less, this is what you believed. And now I'm going to show you how it's wrong. I'm going to show you how the church is walking utterly different than the way that I want them to. The church doesn't know what faith is. If they did, they would walk in it. But they know what faith is to a point, asking Jesus in by faith. But when it comes to following in line with what Jesus had said in Matthew 6, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Man still worries about these things. So it shows that man is not walking fully in what God wants of him to do. So that is why God had called me to the ministry that I'm in, is to teach the church that you need to trust God. you know and if you trust God, then you're really not going to be following what this world says you got to do. How many then would be God focused, you know giving their lives and their wills to God, saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? Send me where you want me. So God had called me to depend on him, and this calling goes in direct defiance to the laws of success or the success of this world. Now, if you wish to live for God, you must count the cost of doing this. If you surrender your will to God, you must understand that whatever direction that God has sent you to will be directly conflicting with what this world believes. So you have to understand that you can be ridiculed. You must understand that whatever calling that God has put you through will most likely go against what you know. And so I think about John G. Lake and how he was called to go to, I believe, another country to minister. And so he didn't have the funds to do it. So he was in line. He still didn't receive, you know, anything from God, about this. I think it was a bus ticket or a train ticket. He didn't have any money for that, but he was walking obediently to what God called him to. And so somebody walked up to him and said, God told me to give this to you. And it was the exact money he needed for a ticket. So he was able to go and minister. So this would go in complete conflict with this world where he's saying, well, why are you waiting on God? Why not depend on him for what, why are you depending on God? Why not work for what you need? And so, you know, in doing so for God, John G. Lake was obedient and listened to him. And so when you follow God truly, and you're following his instructions will seem ludicrous. It will not be logical. But what really matters is walking obediently to what he wants. So God doesn't get enjoyment out of our suffering, when he calls us to different things, when he has a will for us to do. He's not sadistic. He's not up there looking at us getting ridiculed by people. If anything, he is by our side and he shows us how faulty the world is and that there is a higher standard. The higher standard with Abraham was walking in true faith to God. The higher standard for Elijah was to call people back to God from Baal. Jesus was used to teach us a better life, not worrying about our daily needs, but depending truly on him. And so that is basically this message. And the purpose of it is showing us that when you truly live for God, he's going to call you to his specific purposes. And we must count the cost when we say yes. Who knows how it's going to conflict in the way the world functions. So I just wanted to share that with you. And, if you have already surrendered your will to God, you've already understood in some ways how it conflicts with the world, and you have probably already been ridiculed and criticized. But really, that's part of it. We're not called to an easy life. We're called to live for God, to be a light to this world. We're called out of this world to live for God. And that's why we're told that we're not to love this world or anything of the world. Because if we love the world, that's going to keep us from what God wants for us. So I just wanted to share this message with you.